Ron Howard has a documentary coming out about the Beatles in September, and this involves the early touring years. You know, before they went off the road and then just did things in the studio until they broke up. But in those early days, Ron Howard has gathered all this film and some music that you haven't heard before, and it should be pretty interesting to see because it goes way, way back. But I have to tell you the truth, he didn't go back as far as my people have, because we've turned up some things that, that they didn't even turn up. Did you know, well, first of all, most of you know Pete Best was the drummer for the Beatles before Ringo Starr was the drummer for the Beatles. But even before Pete Best, there were other drummers. One of them is famous as one of the main figures in the Cold War. That's Fidel Castro. And I suppose that you didn't know Fidel started out not just running a revolution in Havana, Cuba, but actually drumming with the Beatles. Drumming with the Beatles. Now, at that time, I don't think the Beatles were expected to be anything more than, well, some sort of concrete jazz group, because they really weren't very talented, and they didn't have electrical instruments, and they didn't really have any gigs to speak of. But somewhere along the line, they got a break, and that was to play as third fiddle, certainly not opening the show, but playing at a place called Hardy's Dumpster. It's kind of legendary in the rock world. At Hardy's Dumpster, the head of the bill was Marvin Pod and the Mystery Beavers. And you may have forgotten about them, but one time they were top of the heap. As I got to tell you something here. Even before they backed up, Marvin, I got to tell you, there were rumors going around about other personnel in the Beatles, which is basically how they got this job. Now, you probably have heard, if you've read a bunch of history about the Beatles, you probably heard the tale that Jimmy Hoffa was also in the group at some point. And it is true, Jimmy Hoffa wrote a book, Don't Bury Me Until I'm Actually Dead, and in that book he says that he used to work as 1/4 of a famous pop foursome, but it wasn't the Beatles. It was Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Hoffa at that time. And then later, after he left, he would be replaced by Neil Young. But he did get the Beatles on the ticket there with Marvin. And Marvin Pod, if I can just digress here for a minute, it was long rumored to be the grandson of Frank Sinatra by somebody. He couldn't sing very well, but the Mystery Beavers were very good musicians. You had, in that group, you had Powell Webley Valparaiso, who would later become an astronaut, and you had Firamona del Tunabago. Very, very promising group. Anyway, when they played there at Hardy's Dumpster, you may have noticed on that sticker it said that there was free admission with Puma photos, because in those days people didn't actually pay to get into some of these clubs. They brought, I don't know, you could call it wampum beads, or you could call it, trading, one of those secret economies. And this was influenced by Fidel being in the group and stuff like that. But Puma photos were used for a while. Then what happened is that at a certain point, the Beatles decided to become electric. And even though Ron Howard didn't find it, we found some audio from John Lennon talking about that period. Do we have that audio that we could play there?
Well, yeah, when we first started out, we were doing polkas mostly. And then Paul said, let's give a shot at this Lithuanian folk music. But it didn't go down well. So one day we saw some amplifiers in a shop, and we said, let's do this, let's plug in. And the rest is history.
Well, there you have it. Basically, after Fidel, it was actually Fidel came into some money and bought them some amps, and then they got a gig at the Cabin. That's what happened next. At the Cabin, and I think we have a poster from there too. This is where they became famous. It was the place. The motto, you might remember, where the truly hip shake their hips. It's like the staff shake-up was a dance that they called at the time. Here they have their explosive new guitar sound, the explosive new guitar sound. And here, interesting, it continues this policy of getting in without money, which is interesting. I mean, that's not covered in any of the Cold War textbooks that I remember reading, much less any of the Beatles books. But here, ladies were admitted free with New Zealand fur seal hairdos or pictures, one of the two. So now the Beatles, and this isn't in Ron Howard's movie, by the way. This is all stuff I'm telling you that we found out. The Beatles are now an electric group, but they don't have a record. And in their mind, they've got to have a hit record if they're going to go anywhere, right? They've got to have a hit record. So another guy steps into the picture here to kind of deliver what they need. And who do you think it might be? Donald Trump. Donald Trump. Donald has another book out this campaign season. I don't know if it's out yet. I have an advance copy. It's a book called Things I Never Thought to Mention. And there's an entire chapter about his association with the Fab Four, or at that point they were still called the Fab 6 or 7. Don says, I was the popular one. I always got the girls, and they were so jealous, they being the other guys. And that's why he eventually got kicked out of the group. But not before he did them a big favor. He used his fortune, which mostly came from his dad. I think you know part of that story. His dad gave him $1 million, and the first thing he did was to record a record with the Beatles. It was mostly the Beatles. Don Trump was just playing tambourine, but he got credited for more than that. With a little help from my dad, came out way, way before any of the other singles that you've heard. It only sold 8 copies, and I actually have one of those copies along with a certificate of authenticity. Donald Trump is credited along with Lennon and McCartney as being the writer, and on the B side of that record you had I Should Have Known Betty. Now, we don't know for sure about Betty, but I think Betty may be that Meredith Terrier woman who turned out to be a 2, but she never had any number 1s, okay? If you follow what I'm saying. In any case, that's what we found out that Ron Howard did not find out about those early touring days of the Beatles. Now, I have to say, I already, speaking with the insiders, I know that another movie is coming after this one in September, and this will deal with some of the things most people don't know about that the Beatles did after they broke up, what they did individually. For example, John Lennon, we could call him Lennon the inventor, tried to market, he wasn't very successful, market a singing cigarette and an early form of invisible horse and a miniature hair conditioner. But, you know, most of that, you don't know anything about it if you read the papers. Nope. McCartney bought the Vatican Library. I mean, he had a little money left over, and he started a string of filling stations in Wyoming, and not that many, about 17, something like that. George Harrison, he went to Trump University at Donald's suggestion, and he financed some sheepdog experiments. I don't know too much about those yet, but my staff is working on it. And of course, Ringo Starr located the Holy Grail. I say of course, I mean that's because we had those secret documents a long time ago, but it's just coming to the attention of Ron Howard now. So there you have it. Go watch the movie, but remember we told you the parts that aren't even in the movie, right?